Okay, now we're going to take a look at the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which is the 7 days of unleavened bread, and also the Feast of Firstfruits. So we're in Leviticus 23, and we're going to pick up in verse 4. Leviticus 23:4 says, "These are the feasts of Yahweh, holy convocations, which you shall proclaim at their appointed times. On the 14th day of the first month at twilight is Yahweh's Passover." Okay, so the previous video was about that. Now in verse 6 it says, "And on the 15th day," so on the following day, "on the 15th day of the same month is the feast of unleavened bread to Yahweh." So if it's the 15th day, if the first day of the month is the conjunction, which is when the moon is completely black, you can't see the moon, then 15 days later is halfway through the lunar cycle, because the lunar cycle is about 29 and a half days. And so on the new moon, on the first day of the days of unleavened bread, every year you see a complete full moon. Okay? So then it says in verse so that's unleavened bread. In verse 7 it says, "On the first day you shall have a holy convocation." Okay, so again, you get together with brethren and you have a special, it's a Sabbath, except it's an annual Sabbath. Okay? So you have the first day of unleavened bread, and it's a holy convocation. You shall do no customary work on it, because it's a Sabbath. But you shall offer an offering made by fire to Yahweh for 7 days. We don't do that anymore because we don't make offerings of sacrifice. We make spiritual offerings of ourselves, but we don't need to make any animal sacrifice offerings, because Yeshua was the Lamb of Yahweh and he was the final sacrifice. "The 7th day shall be a holy convocation. You shall do no customary work on it." Okay. So during these 7 days, the first day and the 7th day, so you have on the 14th day of the month you have the Passover. On the next day, on the first day, which is the first day of unleavened bread, which is the 15th day of the month, and then for 7 days, then finally on the 7th, the 7 days you have all of the 7 days of unleavened bread. And I'm going to explain to you more or less what you do on those days. Finally, on the 7th day, you have another holy convocation. Most years, these don't land on the weekly Sabbath. These can be a Monday, a Tuesday, a Wednesday, a Thursday. It can be any day of the week. Every year it's different. So you're going to have your normal weekly Sabbath, which is Friday night sunset till Saturday night sunset. But you're also going to have these annual Sabbaths. And so during these 7 days, you have to make sure you have no leavening in your house. What's leavening? Leavening is yeast or baking soda or baking powder. It's anything to make bread or crackers or cake or pizza to make it rise, to make it inflate and get puffed up. The reason we take the leavening out is because it's symbolic of sin. It's symbolic of our effort in our lives to get rid of sin. And you're going to see, if this is the first year that you're keeping unleavened bread, that just when you thought you had all of the leavening out of your house, during the week you find that you left, hopefully you don't do this, but you find that you left some crackers or an energy bar that has leavening in it, or something that has leavening in it, hidden away in a drawer, in a cabinet, in your backpack, in your car, or somewhere on your premises, and you need to get rid of all of it. And you have to consume it or throw it out. And you want to keep your house or your apartment or your bedroom, if you live with your family and they don't keep these days, but you will be keeping these days, then at least your space, whatever your space is, you need to keep it clean of leavening. And so you should check boxes and everything for the ingredients. Baking soda and baking powder are leavening, and so is yeast, of course. And so you want to get rid of all of that. You shouldn't have any bread or consume any of those items even outside of your house during that week. You should consume unleavened things. Nowadays it's really nice because some Mexican tortillas, you have to read the ingredients, but a lot of them, some of them, I shouldn't say a lot of them, some of them are made with no leavening. You have to check. Different brands have leavening and other brands don't, even though they look the same and they look flat. Just because something is flat doesn't mean it doesn't have leavening. You need to check the ingredients. But you could also buy matzahs. I like to make them myself at home. You know what ingredients you're putting in it, and you can get different recipes off the internet for unleavened bread. But that's what you eat for that week, and that's what it symbolizes. It symbolizes our quest, our desire to get sin out of our life. It's something constant that we always have to be checking for and looking to do that, to eliminate sin from our life, because we are told to be perfect like our Father in heaven is perfect. And He has no sin, of course. And so that's our goal, to be perfect. We can't achieve that in this physical life, but that's why we have Yeshua. So during those days, that's what you do. And you just have to find a way to eat other things. You can eat pasta. Pasta has no leavening in it. And Jews have other rules for what's considered kosher for Passover. But we just have to make sure that we have no leavening in the product. Now that doesn't mean you can't drink a beer. Beer has leavening in it, but it's not leavening to puff up the beer. Beer isn't bread or something that's a leavened edible product like that. It's a drink, so it's different. Alright, so during those days, so that's what you're going to do during those days. Now there's lots of symbolism, and I recommend that you Google the words Feast of Unleavened Bread and do different studies on, there's so much to read about unleavened bread and what you can do during that time, and the Passover. So I recommend you look that up. But during those days, let's continue now in Leviticus 23. It says in verse 9, talking about another feast which happens during the Feast of Unleavened Bread. So it sounds complicated, but that's going to be, let's say it's from a Tuesday to a Tuesday for 7 days. There's going to fall a Saturday or a Sabbath during those 7 days, and then the day after that, the Sunday, is the Feast of Firstfruits, and that's where you find it. It's the Sunday that falls during those days. Now it's really from Saturday sunset to Sunday sunset. It says in verse 9, "And Yahweh spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the children of Israel, and say to them, When you come into the land which I give you, and reap its harvest, then you shall bring a sheaf of the first fruits of your harvest to the priest. He shall wave the sheaf before Yahweh to be accepted on your behalf on the day after the Sabbath." See, the day after the Sabbath would be, for us, we call it Sunday. It's the first day of the week. It starts with the sunset on Sabbath, right after Sabbath ends. "The priest shall wave it, and you shall offer on that day, when you wave the sheaf, a male lamb of the first year without blemish as a burnt offering to Yahweh." So that male lamb that was offered was Yeshua. He was the first fruit. And you see how all of these symbolic things that they were practicing in the Old Testament were all to be played out and done and lived by Yeshua. And so he was the offering made. And that's why we don't have to sacrifice a lamb anymore, because he was already that lamb. But we do remember it for a sweet aroma, and its drink offering shall be made. And you can read the rest down to verse 14. But this is something that we also, some people don't really celebrate this, but I think it is something good on that day, because it is still during the days of unleavened bread, on that Sunday, to get together and have a service and study these scriptures and do a little study on those too. And remember that this is the day of the Feast of First Fruits. Okay, so that's just an outline on this subject, on the days of unleavened bread. And if this is the first year, 2009, that you'll be keeping it, then I hope you study up on it a lot. You have some time, hopefully, to study on the Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread for 7 days and the Feast of First Fruits.